Hello, I'm Karen Toulon, Chief Correspondent for Equality here at Bloomberg News here in New York, and welcome to our discussion on building the diverse workforce of the future. Our panelists are all experts in this field. They are Damien Hooper-Campbell, he's the Chief Diversity Officer at Zoom, Alicia Petross, the Chief Diversity Officer at Hershey, and Lesley Slaton Brown, the Chief Diversity Officer at HP. Welcome to everyone. Now, you're all three very different DEI professionals from three very different companies with very different legacies. What you all have in common is that you're not looking way off into the distance when it comes to building diverse workforces. Diversity is mission critical, and it's a mission that is happening right now. And so I am very excited to beginning our conversation today. And so I want to start off first really looking at and talking about where your companies were just as the focus on global racial reckoning was happening, just as COVID was kicking in, and also at the same time that their shareholders and other stakeholders are really starting to pay attention to ESG. And and so with that, I'll start off with you, Lesley, at at HP, where you've said that diversity is kind of baked into HP's DNA. An 80-year-old company, the first woman, the first Black American, and the first Asian American employees back in 1940, 1943, and 1946, respectively. But you've said that HP's journey in the diversity kind of landscape has been one of not just diversity, but about moving from diversity to inclusion and belonging. What does that really mean?
Well, so first of all, Karen, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here with Alicia and Damien. Hello. Yeah, as an 80-plus-year-old company, it's interesting because when we talk about it being a critical part of who we are, I mean, well into the 1940s, when HP's in its inception, we looked at how do we build diversity, how do we build equity within the company, and although there was always room for improvement, I think it's important to note that that was well before civil rights, 20 plus years before even civil rights was going on. And so the work that we're doing today in that evolution from just the representation of diversity to making sure that it's equalizing, that it's equitable within the company, of job opportunity, of leadership. And so for a company that serves customers in 170 countries across the globe, it's really important to get it right. It's important to have the representation. It's important to have the equity. But more important than that even is when you get us here, we have to have that space to really thrive. And that's the belonging and the inclusion piece of it. And so that's the work that we're really focused on today, is how do we welcome everyone in and really allow them to thrive and do their best work at HP.
And how important is leadership? How important is senior leadership to that equation?
It's critical. And we started at separation 5 years ago from Hewlett Packard Enterprise to HP Inc. It was important for us to stand up an infrastructure that started with our board of directors and really allowing for the most diverse board of directors in the tech industry. And so the importance of that is the guidance, the vision that the board affords us. But more importantly than that is the push and the mentorship that the board allows as well. And so we established a dual mentorship kind of a program with board members and our senior most leaders of the company, L1 leaders. And so as the board is mentoring and coaching those L1 leaders, they're also learning more about the businesses. They have the opportunity to travel to our sites and look at and talk with our employees, our business impact networks, and hear firsthand what's happening on the floors at HP.
Now, Alicia, at Hershey, also a company with a huge legacy of community involvement, especially around children and education. Um, your company has really kind of talked a lot about intentionality. Um, why is intentionality so important? Why is that something that you focused on?
Yeah, first, Karen, it's an honor to be here today, and I'm so excited to be part of the conversation with peers Lesley and Damien, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot from everybody who's a part of this dialogue. You know, Hershey has such a proud legacy of bringing goodness to the world, and that really focuses on equity and inclusion. And so for us, we know that our efforts in this space must be intentional. And so we look to our legacy of goodness to inform everything that we're doing today and also to help us push our organization into the future. You know, at Hershey, DEI is a priority. This is something that makes us a leader in the industry, makes us a great company that people want to work for, and a company that people want to do business with. And we are really focused on this. And what's different for us right now is that we are really focusing on leading with bold transparency. And this goes directly to our leadership stance. You know, people really have to feel a culture of DEI in order for it to be really real. And it's no longer about what I think we should do, it's about what we think we should do. And so to ensure this, we're infusing DEI in everything that we do. And our tone at the top is critical. You know, we're an organization that had a woman on our board of directors in 1970. And so we are continuing that legacy of equity and inclusion. Today, Michelle Buck, our amazing CEO and chairwoman, leads the Hershey Board of Directors, which is 58% diverse, inclusive of 5 women. Our executive committee is 44% diverse, and our global workforce is nearly 50% female. So we have accomplished a lot. Women and people of color lead many of our top commercial roles, but we also know we have more to do. We are not done, and we have set some really ambitious goals.
Okay, so we're going to come back to those goals, but Damien, I want to come to you. All right, timing is everything, Damien. Timing is everything. And so you joined Zoom to this brand new role at Zoom just weeks after the murder of George Floyd. I really just can't imagine new role at a new company at such a time. You joined a company that was in the process of becoming a verb, right? I mean, it really is remarkable, right? And so you had said, I think, you know, when we were chatting with your team before, that you'd wanted to do a listening tour when you joined Zoom. You really didn't have the time to do that, right? That kind of went out the window to do this listening tour, right? You had intense external demand from your customers, right? And then intense, I would imagine, intense internal need from your employees, right? And then you're in a new role. How did your experience with other companies, which ironically also seem to me at least to be verbs as well, eBay, Uber, Google, right? Companies that have vast experience in the tech field. How did that help you kind of figure out, how am I going to chart this course? How am I going to thread this needle, right? Of meeting the demands of my customers, communicating with my employees.
Yeah, great question. And hello, peace, everybody. Damien Hooper-Campbell. My gender pronouns are he, him, and his. Hello to my esteemed colleagues. Karen, thank you so much for having me. Look, I think I got a lot from those other experiences that I was blessed to have at other companies. But I think all 4 of us can agree there is no preparation for COVID. There's no preparation for working from home all of a sudden and working virtually. There's no preparation for the significant movement around racial and social equity that we all found ourselves in. And Karen, I wish that it was weeks after George Floyd's murder that I joined. I joined days after. June 1st was my first day. And so imagine I am a Black man in the United States, so I have that duality of my own feelings about the situation. But I'm also trying to start this practice virtually through this 13-inch laptop here. And I'm trying to do it at a company that has clearly had investment in DEI, but is now really putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is important to us, and so we want to centralize it. So I don't know that there was preparation from before, definitely around a technical understanding, definitely around, this being the third practice that I've started. I understood that this needed to be something where I had to listen, but it's exactly what you said. I didn't have time to listen, right? I literally was thrown into it. And so what I would say is, balancing, we adopted very early on, as I rolled out some of our guiding principles, a principle that said we're going to adopt an inside out mentality. And so while there was lots of pressure to say things externally, and we said a couple of things externally, we said, look, we don't want there to be a delta between what we're saying outside and what we're doing inside. And so we really spent a great deal of time with employees going headfirst into the touchy conversation around race, which oftentimes people don't want to get into. We went into conversations that were deep around social equity and around justice. And so it therein gave us an opportunity to listen to our people, but to also fast forward and accelerate a conversation that oftentimes is put as the last thing that companies want to talk about. And so I would simply again say that I don't know that there was preparation for it. I think we just decided, regardless of what's going on in the world, we have to start in-house first. And so we began with our inside out mentality and are still kind of on this same journey of helping people to understand each other's differences.
So I want to move in. We have about 20 minutes left. I want to move into the real heart of meat of the conversation, which is what works, right? Let's turn this conversation about what we'd like to do and what would be nice to do into what might actually work, what's going to actually help our employees do what they want to do, come to work, be successful, go home and have happy lives while helping our businesses succeed. And so, Alicia, you said two of my favorite words, bold and transparency. So maybe we should start there. At HP, you one of the tools you used was an annual employee survey. Is that someplace that we should start? Is that something that you found helpful, to pick up on Damien's point, looking at your employees, talking to employees, looking internally and saying, okay, let's get our house in order. What are our employees thinking? What's important to them?
Yeah. So for Hershey, change starts really by listening to the hearts and minds of our employees. And we've got a really robust internal census survey process, so we're constantly doing that. What was different was that after the death of George Floyd, similar to Damien's viewpoint, we really knew we wanted to slow down, take a moment, pause, and reflect. Reflect on the work that we had done, but also take the time to listen to what was on the hearts and minds of our employees. And so one of the takeaways that we have is that co-creation is really key to accelerating change. So post George Floyd and amidst the pandemic, we conducted many listening sessions with hundreds of Hershey employees across the globe. These conversations were really born from dialogue from our business resource groups, our 8 vibrant employee-led affinity groups in the company. And by the way, our BRG participants grew 37% in 2020. So we know that everyone is looking for a place to go to have really rich dialogue. And our Black BRG produced some 1-minute videos about the realities and struggles of being Black in America. One of the things that we learned is that our previous efforts on diversity, equity, and inclusion were focused mainly at the executive level. And so what's different for us now is employees want to be involved. And so we've intentionally tilted our focus at the entry and mid levels of our organization, so that we are driving diversity, equity, and inclusion at all levels of the company. Now, we're a company that measures a lot.
And are those mid-level employees, are they involved in decision making as well?
Yes, they are. And one of the big lessons that we've learned is to really focus on the priorities that are key for our employees. And so out of that, we really hyper-focused more of our data efforts around representation, looking at race, promotion rates, and equity measures. I am super proud to share that the Hershey Company has no pay gap. That's right. In aggregate, all of our U.S. roles occupied by women and people of color, employees are earning $1 for $1 compared to white males. Now, we get there through a lot of intentional actions. And our Pathways project was born out of those listening sessions. So for us, that's our 5-year plan to make Hershey even more diverse and more inclusive. And again, Karen and team, this came directly from the hearts and the thinking of our employees. So we're really focused on 3 pillars. More pathways to join, bringing in a wider perspective of talent into the organization. More pathways to grow, recognizing and developing talent we haven't always in the past, and more ways to reach out, showing up for consumers and communities in new ways. And our BRGs play prominently in some of the strategic efforts that we are undertaking.
Now, Lesley, at at HP, um, you've also done your listening tour and helped develop the goals that you were going to get out of those. What were some of the goals that then came out of your listening tour?
Yeah, so I think to Alicia's point, we wanted to be intentional. We wanted to be bold. And more than anything, transparent but honest about like where are we really? And so we did a deep dive on data. And the data isn't just for data's sake, but it's the data to tell the story. And our story showed that, one, we're doing great, but we have room for improvement. So we were very intentional about hyper focusing on how do we build more leadership, Black leadership, because people need to see themselves up the chain. And so we set goals around 2x hiring of Black at the VP level and above. We looked at our growth and increase in women in tech, Black women and Black people in tech, and set room for improvement. So let's put some numbers around what do we want to see in the future. Our goal by 2030 is to see 30% women in technical roles as well, and people of color. We just went across the board and just said, there's just more for us to do. And so we focus our sustainability, sustainable impact goals on 3 primary pillars, and that is climate action, it's human rights, and it's digital equity. And so within each of those, the task force that we formed as a result of George Floyd, the racial task force that we formed was really designed to build up those strategies that are deeply embedded into the business itself. And so no more are we saying we've got initiatives and we've got programs, and we do have those things. It is what goals are we driving at the highest level of the company within these strategic pillars and embedding those goals into that. And so our focus we go from our management business objectives annually, 50-50 gender, racial equality, VP level and above for tech. And then we build out to 2025. We have very specific goals for increase in Black employees. And then we have 2030 goals around our overarching sustainability impact goals.
And for some of these goals, how are they encouraged? Are there metrics around compensation for how does that work?
Yeah, and I think and Alicia brought this up as well. Is we're looking at not only gender equity but racial equality as well within our pay, and so we do an annual assessment of that. We do our annual voice in insights in action survey. We do as a result of quarantine, we did quick clicks to be able to understand wellness, health and wellness of our employees. We report, monthly, quarterly, to our senior leadership, to our CEO, and to our board of directors on the work that we're doing. So accountability is our focus this year, of not only putting the goals in place, but how do we hold ourselves accountable? And by the way, those initiatives and those programs and the councils that we have all need to ladder up to those goals that we've put in place.
Wow. Now, Damien, I find your role interesting because in addition to everything else, you also sit in, or you're also involved in product design, and you also have college recruiting. The entire recruiting piece also reports into you. I especially find the product design compelling. I don't know if that was part of the plan all along, or if that was something that you kind of said, this needs to be part of what part of my role when you landed at Zoom. Can you explain why that is, why that's important?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, look, I think my colleagues have just articulated that a lot of the work that they're doing, and kudos to both of you for where you're on the journey, ladders up to business goals. And so making sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion touches every part of the company is kind of just, I think, good DEI strategy. And so, yes, it was absolutely part of my job description. It was part of the conversations I had early with our founder and CEO and with multiple stakeholders on the leadership team. And it was important that we say, hey, if we're really going to play this thing out, if we really believe that a more inclusive way of hiring and intentionality there leads to a more diverse set of folks in the workplace, and then you create this environment where people bring all their backgrounds and tackle tough problems, well, it doesn't stop there. We've got to also be very proactive as we think about the way we design, who's designing, and who we're designing for. And so there were early conversations where myself and my team were brought into product reviews to say, hey, we're thinking about doing this. What do you think? And we said, well, it would be silly of us to be the only ones who are opining on whether or not this is inclusive or what we're missing, because even as DEI practitioners, we don't know it all. And so what did we do? We looked out to many of the employees, our employee resource groups. We looked out to a broad group of stakeholders inside and outside. One of the most recent examples of this is our pronouns feature that just recently launched. Shout out to Ronnie Dickerson-Stewart on my team who led that work. But that was great partnership with our product team, where we said, look, customers want this feature. They want to be able to have broader optionality to self-identify. And it is a phenomenal way for us to advocate for so many people who are oftentimes misgendered. And so that was intentional work with our product team, but we also worked with our Pride ERG. We also worked with GLAAD as an external organization and got feedback from customers. And so it's really just the beginning. And on the university side, we also are being very intentional with our early in career talent to say, this is a pipeline that builds, and we're starting this practice from scratch, our university recruiting practice. Why in the heck wouldn't we embed diversity, equity, and inclusion into this from its very early stages? So yes, absolutely, product inclusion is a major part of what we do. It's what our customers need. It's our way to deliver happiness to them. And it's just something that we're committed to as a long-term process.
And so, part of your roles isn't just what you're doing, and you all three are doing so much within your own companies, But it strikes me that there's a broader role. There is the leadership within your own companies, but there really is, to your point, Damien, there really is a leadership role that you fill within your industries, within your communities. There is a best practice role. There is I won't even say best practice. There is a best trying role. My mother used to say, even if you don't know what to say, sometimes just say something. Um, and there is we may not be getting everything right, but we are being intentional. We're being transparent. We are trying. We're doing something. It's not haphazard. There's a method. We're measuring. We're holding ourselves accountable. Um, but that seems to me to be a very serious part of this job that I don't know if it's always been that way. And maybe that's something that those of you who've been in doing this for the longest can talk about. But it's that role within the broader community, with your stakeholders, with your shareholders, with the universities, with your employee groups, with your communities, with the other citizens that you run across. Where you're kind of showing what can be done, what can be possible, while still conducting a responsible business. Can you talk about that a little bit? Alicia, is that right? Is that true? Is that something that feels different now than it did perhaps a couple of years ago?
What feels different for us right now is that we're including so many voices in the creation of our intentional actions around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Hershey's had a long history around equity. Our founder, Milton Hershey, started the Milton Hershey School for underserved kids in 1909. And so that world-class organization today serves 2,000 underserved youth. And so this legacy of supporting children in education has always been important for us. And we believe that every child deserves the right to a bright future through education. When we talk about the involvement of employees, I'm really excited to share that our unprecedented endowment with the Thurgood Marshall College Fund that we started last year with an initial infusion of $1.5 million and will grow to $3 million over the next 10 years was actually an idea from two leaders of our Black BRG, Danielle and Mo. Danielle happens to be a TMCF alum, and she said, when I was studying food science at a TMCF HBCU, I really could have used a little additional assistance. And we listened to her story and we thought, we can do this. This aligns with our purpose, with our values. This is a proud proof point on how we are taking a stand to create a more equitable future. And so we look at our initiatives not only through our internal goals, many of which are linked to executive compensation, and we report out on those quarterly. We speak with our employee base frequently, but we also look at our role in creating a brighter and more inclusive world. And so we are infusing our efforts across our supply chain, across our ESG efforts, and we're really being quite intentional and specific in these focuses.
Lesley, how do you not get distracted? How do you maintain focus on the work that has to be done? You have your pillars that you have to service, but how do you not get distracted with everything that's on your plate?
It's, one, because we have very clear goals, and because we are being held accountable, which as I said before, when you look at the value of what your board brings and your executive leadership team to hold themselves and the employees accountable with those clear goals and focus all the time, because they are deeply embedded into our strategy. It's very difficult to not stay focused, right, when you're being held accountable. And so what I'll add, however, is, and what I believe that the George Floyd murder afforded us, was the opportunity to have even deeper, more real conversations about race which were, I believe, a little bit absent in the workplace. And so how do you solve to something that you can't really talk about? And so, and that's what it's brought into view for us, is to be able to bring specific goals, specific targets into view that are centered around, wow, we're off balance here when we start looking at this diverse workforce that we're striving for. And so so we stay focused on that, and in light of other things that come along, whether it's, you know, Asian hate and the unrest in Israel and, you know, all of those things, those are